one. I think that's why I confused myself and you guys, but now I figured it out. So I will just hand the floor over to you, sir.
जी जी शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत. So I will try to share my screen now. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
ठीक है, मैं इसको जरा थोड़ा वो करता हूँ, full screen करता हूँ, and just let me know if you can see. Do you see the full screen or do you see the slide mode?
We can see the full screen.
Okay, very good.
Full screen.
जी जी. Okay, so I mean my objective here is abhi aapne in the last lecture you have learned a little bit about the atmosphere, and in the one before you heard something about the biosphere. So there are very interesting environmental sciences problem in which the biosphere is actually affected by what's going on in the atmosphere, and this sort of land atmosphere interactions, water atmosphere interactions. I mean, these are all very sort of interconnected system. Or of course the crops that we grow and the agriculture, that is also in there. So ये देखना कि ये जो plants हैं, how do they get affected by these sort of environmental issues. So what I brought in here is kind of a case study of a particular work that we are doing. So इससे एक तो ये आपको वो थोड़े से interactions के बारे में भी पता चलेगा. Secondly, you can also see like what's the kind of work that we do at our center, और पाकिस्तान के लिए खास तौर पे कुछ चीजें जो हैं वो कैसी are they important, and when you go about doing these sort of problems, looking at these problems, what kind of tools and models and sort of scholarly areas do you encounter. So I mean the title of the talk, as you can see from here, is understanding the impacts of air pollution, in particular winter smog, on agricultural productivity. So ये थोड़ा सा it's a little bit of an out of the ordinary है. Usually we talk about the impact of air pollution or winter smog on human health. लेकिन यहाँ पर हम क्या बात कर रहे हैं? We are specifically talking about some agricultural produce. कि क्या ये जो अभी pollution होती है इसका कोई agricultural production के ऊपर कोई impact है या नहीं है? So before I go forward, I would just like to quickly acknowledge कि ये काम जो है, this is basically my master student Jodat bint Khalil, and I wish she would have been presenting today. This occurred to me later on, lekin mainly credit goes to her, and then our collaborator at NASA, Maudud Khan, and then I myself have something to do with this. Okay. Moving on, as I just explained, कि हम करना क्या चाह रहे हैं? The purpose is to assess the impacts of ozone concentration. ठीक है? The O3 का symbol जो है, this is for ozone. Those of you who know just a little bit of chemistry, O2 is the ordinary oxygen, but O3 is special form of oxygen. तो हम यही symbol जो है इस्तेमाल करेंगे. And the impact on crop yields at 2 different farms located in Punjab. As far as approach is concerned, I've simplified it quite a bit to just for you to sort of absorb at first कि क्या हमारे steps हैं. So we'll be looking at some computer models to simulate these pollutant concentrations, so that you can know कि इसका भी कोई role है, ये computing का और modeling का भी इस area में कोई role है. And then we develop some instruments, so you will see how electrical engineering, electronics, these sort of gadgets, they actually come in. उनका क्या रोल है इस तरह की environmental sciences की studies में? So I think last time Fauzi exposed you to some weather stations and all, so you'll see something similar. And then when you do the simulations and then you do the observations, तो फिर उनका आप comparisons करते हैं, and then using that you do the yield loss analysis at a particular. That's the rough sort of roadmap, and I'll try to be as quick as possible here. Okay? There are many details here, technical details, which maybe in the slides I will flash. Those of you who want to explore more can ask me later questions on, but some details I will be skipping. अच्छा, now this is a recall from last time. ठीक है, जो आपने देखा था कि जो ozone है, this is actually a secondary pollutant. ठीक है, तो main driver is the sun which is coming in, और उसके अलावा then there are all these anthropogenic sources. मुराद ये है कि लोग जो हैं वो गंद फैला रहे हैं, और उसकी वजह से you looked at these primary pollutants like NOx and VOCs, और उनका जो आपस में reaction है उसकी वजह से one of the secondary pollutants जो है वो ozone है. ठीक है, तो ये you must have done this last time, और इसको वो photochemical smog हम कह रहे हैं. अच्छा, so just summarizing, Ozone by itself is actually a highly reactive form of oxygen. It is an oxidizing agent. ट्रोपोस्फेरिक ओजोन, ट्रोपोस्फेयर का भी वर्ड मेरे ख्याल में पिछली दफा इस्तेमाल किया गया था, मुराद है जो नीचे वाली एटमॉस्फेयर है, जो एटमॉस्फेयर की वो लेयर जो जमीन के बिल्कुल करीब है, उसको हम ट्रोपोस्फेयर कहते हैं। तो ये जो है उसमें ओजोन की प्रेजेंस जो है दैट डैमेजेस ह्यूमन लंग टिश्यू एंड प्लांट लीफ टिश्यूज। दिस इज जस्ट टू सॉर्ट ऑफ अलर्ट यू कि वो जो ओजोन होल की हम बात करते हैं दैट्स ओजोन एट अ डिफरेंट लेवल, ठीक है, वो हम ट्रोपोस्फेयर की बात नहीं कर रहे थे। तो यहाँ पर ये ट्रोपोस्फेयर की बात होगी। अच्छा, अब ये कैसे बनती है ये हमने ऑलरेडी जिक्र कर लिया है कि देयर इज दिस सेकेंडरी पोल्यूशन, यानी कि जब एक दफा प्राइमरी पोल्यूटेंट्स हैं वो आपस में रिएक्ट करते हैं और उसकी वजह से वन ऑफ द प्रोडक्ट्स, सेकेंडरी प्रोडक्ट्स जो है वो ओजोन है। उसके सोर्सेज हैं वो भी हमने बात कर ली, उसके कुछ नेचुरल सोर्सेज हैं, कुछ मैन मेड सोर्सेज हैं, ये भी वंस अगेन लास्ट टाइम बात हो चुकी है। अच्छा, जो ओजोन की कॉन्सेंट्रेशन है विद इन द अर्बन एरियाज ज्यादा होती है अंडरस्टैंडेबली, और खास तौर पे सन का यहाँ पर जो है वो बड़ा गहरा एक रोल है, क्योंकि इन द प्रेजेंस ऑफ लाइट एक्चुअली दीज रिएक्शंस टेक प्लेस। तो ऑन हॉट सनी डेज आई मीन ये जो है प्रोडक्शन ज्यादा होती है। सो फॉर एग्जांपल इफ देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ सनलाइट एंड टेम्परेचर इज वेरी हाई, सो वी वुड एक्सपेक्ट लार्जर कॉन्सेंट्रेशंस ऑफ ओजोन। और व्हाट वी विल बी लुकिंग एट इज उसकी वजह से एक डायरोनल पैटर्न है। नाउ दिस इज अ वर्ड व्हिच मे बी न्यू फॉर यू, so we will just explore this a little bit more, कि there is some sort of a rising concentration in the morning, और जब सनसेट हो जाता है तो ये कॉन्सेंट्रेशन जो है वो नीचे आ जाती है, ठीक है। तो जस्ट एज एन ए साइड ये क्या चीज होती है, व्हाट आर दीज साइकिल्स, तो एज यू कैन सी फ्रॉम दिस एनिमेशन कि ये जो डायरोनल साइकिल्स हैं ये क्या है, ये दीज आर एनी पैटर्न व्हिच बेसिकली इज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ द रोटेशन ऑफ द अर्थ अराउंड इट्स एक्सिस, ठीक है। सुबह शाम की वजह से कोई अगर पैटर्न हो रहा होगा तो दैट्स यूजुअली दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ अ साइकिल। सो ओजोन की प्रोडक्शन इज एन एग्जांपल ऑफ दैट। लेकिन यहाँ पर मैं आपको एक और तरह का पैटर्न दिखा रहा हूँ जस्ट सो दैट यू नो कि इस तरह के पैटर्न्स क्या होते हैं। तो ऑन द एक्स एक्सिस यू कैन सी कि देयर आर 24 आवर्स इन अ डे, और on the y-axis this is energy demand, ठीक है, in Britain. So these processes can be natural processes, these processes can be also engineering processes या social processes भी हो सकते हैं। तो यहाँ पर लोग जो जिस तरह से एनर्जी को इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, so उसका ये डायरोनल प्रोफाइल है, ठीक है। तो दिस विल हेल्प यू अंडरस्टैंड कि हम बाद में क्या बात कर रहे होंगे। सो हो क्या रहा है कि इवन इन दिस फिगर, in winter and in spring and in summer and in autumn, we have taken a lot of observations over many months, या और उनको हमने एवरेज किया, और एवरेज करके हमें पता चल गया कि सुबह 2 बजे आमतौर पे ऑन एवरेज क्या आपके डिमांड होती है एनर्जी की, 4 बजे क्या होती है, 12 बजे क्या होती है, ठीक है। तो दीज आर द सॉर्ट ऑफ पैटर्न्स एंड वी विल बी यूजिंग देम लेटर ऑन फॉर ओजोन, ठीक है। यही हम प्रोड्यूस करेंगे सिमुलेशंस में और इन्हीं को ही हम इस्तेमाल करेंगे फॉर इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स के अंदर भी। अच्छा, अब थोड़ी सी बात हो जाए, वापस हम बायोस्फीयर में आ जाते हैं, जो आपका जो लाइफ प्रोसेसेस हैं उसमें ये ओजोन क्या करती है प्लांट फिजियोलॉजी के साथ। अच्छा, मैं आई हैव टू रेज माय हैंड्स हियर, आई एम नीदर एन एनवायरमेंटल साइंटिस्ट नॉर अ बायोलॉजिस्ट, तो नॉर अ केमिस्ट, तो मेरे लिए सारे सब्जेक्ट्स जो हैं वो बड़े एलियन है। तो आई विल ट्राई माय बेस्ट टू एक्सप्लेन इन माय वेरी सिंपल वर्ड्स, और मुझे प्लीज करेक्ट कीजिए अगर मैं को आपको गलत चीज यहाँ पर कह रहा हूँ, प्लीज डू करेक्ट मी। तो ओजोन इट क्रिएट सब्सटैंशियल डैमेज टू प्लांट्स एंड एग्रीकल्चरल क्रॉप्स। कैसे? बाय इंक्रीजिंग ससेप्टेबिलिटी टू डिजीज, उसकी ग्रोथ कम हो जाती है, रिप्रोडक्टिव कैपेसिटी कम हो जाती है, वगैरह वगैरह। अच्छा, उसका तरीकाकार क्या है? नाउ ऑल ऑफ यू नो अबाउट स्टोमेटा, जो जिसके जरिए से प्लांट्स जो है वो सांस लेते हैं, सो टू स्पीक, यानी आप कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड लेते हैं और वाटर एंड ऑक्सीजन जो बाहर निकालते हैं। सो यू कैन सी in this figure. Now, in a normal situation, this is what is going on in a plant. But when there are all these pollutants, so these pollutants also can enter into the plant via these pores, these stomata हैं। ऐसे ही है ना, हर लीफ के ऊपर there are these thousands and millions of pores, depending on the size of the plant, और उसके जरिए से gases जो हैं वो आ जा रही हैं और पानी जो है वो आ जा रहा है। It penetrates into it, and as we said कि it is an oxidizing agent. तो ऑक्सीडाइजिंग एजेंट जब ओजोन अंदर जाता है तो वो उसको टिश्यू के साथ रिएक्शन स्टार्ट हो जाते हैं, और उनकी वजह से जो प्रोडक्ट्स हैं दे रिजल्ट इन व्हाट? ऑल्टर्ड जीन एक्सप्रेशन, इंपेयर्ड फोटोसिंथेसिस एंड क्लोरोफिल डिग्रेडेशन, ठीक है। उसका जो सब्जा है कम हो जाएगा, उसका फोटोसिंथेसिस यानी एनर्जी बनाने का प्रोसेस खराब हो जाएगा, और उसके अलावा जीन एक्सप्रेशन व्हिच इज कंट्रोलिंग ऑल द लाइफ प्रोसेसेस जो है वो भी सारे के सारे जो है वो ऑल्टर हो जाएंगे। अच्छा, प्लांट इन रिस्पॉन्स वो भी कुछ करने की कोशिश करेगा, तो इट विल ट्राई टू रिएक्ट बैक। ये 2-3 चीजें मैंने बताई हुई है, जैसे स्टोमेटा को क्लोज करने की कोशिश कर सकता है, डिटॉक्सिफिकेशन करने की कोशिश कर सकता है, बट ऑल ऑफ दिस कम्स एट अ कॉस्ट। उसमें क्या होगा कि या तो आपका फोटोसिंथेसिस एनर्जी प्रोडक्शन कम हो जाएगी, या आपके कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स जो आपने प्लांट ने जो फूड बनाना है, अगर वो एग्रीकल्चरल क्रॉप है, तो यहाँ पर उसकी इस तरह से वो यील्ड जो है वो कम होनी शुरू हो जाएगी। सो दैट्स द बेसिक साइंस कि ये ऑक्सीजन जो है वो ओजोन खास तौर पे ये करती क्या है। सो इफ द कंसंट्रेशन गोज हाई, दिस इज हाउ इट डैमेजेस द प्लांट। अच्छा, नाउ दिस इज अ कॉम्प्लेक्स सॉर्ट ऑफ अ चार्ट दैट आई एम शोइंग यू। दिस इज नाउ अ माउथफुल, जो आपने टाइटल देख रहे हैं। इट इज बेसिकली एन एटमॉस्फेरिक डायनामिक्स एंड केमिस्ट्री ट्रांसपोर्ट मॉडलिंग सिस्टम। ये क्या है? दिस इज पोर्टेड ऑन अ लार्ज सुपर कंप्यूटर where we run all of these models, mathematical models. They have been developed to model weather phenomenon, atmosphere की movements, which is atmospheric dynamics, chemical transport, यानी species जो है वो एक जगह से दूसरी जगह कैसे जा रही है, in particular ओजोन है, बाकी अगर हवा चल रही है तो वो कैसे लेके जा रही है स्मॉग को आगे, and so on. तो ये एक कंप्यूटर सिमुलेशन है बहुत बड़ी सी, जिसके लिए एक सुपर कंप्यूटर चाहिए होगा, और उसके ये मुख्तलिफ कंपोनेंट्स हैं. नाउ यू डोंट नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड एवरीथिंग हियर, बट इफ यू लुक एट वेयर आई एम पॉइंटिंग टू, सो द आउटपुट ऑफ दिस मॉडल इज बेसिकली दीज कंसंट्रेशन फील्ड्स. ठीक है, तो ये प्रिडिक्ट कर रही है, इट इज काइंड ऑफ इमेजिनिंग कि ये हो रहा होगा अगर वेदर ऐसा हो, और अगर आपके एंथ्रोपोजेनिक सोर्सेज ऐसे हो, अगर ट्रांसपोर्टेशन ऐसी है लाहौर के अंदर वगैरह वगैरह. ठीक है, and then what we do next is, using these concentrations we will try to do the impact, agricultural impact हम निकालने की कोशिश करेंगे, और फिर yield करेंगे. तो ये this is now all going on in the head, ये कंप्यूटर में हो रहा है. Now this can be one thing. अब हम क्या करते हैं कि जब when the computer generates the model, और ये देखें these are now this again those diagonal models हैं, वो जो हम बात कर रहे थे ना दिन रात वाली, and we try to compare कि अच्छा जो कंप्यूटर कह रहा है, अगर किसी एक साइड पे हमारे पास इंस्ट्रूमेंट लगा हो, आर दे टू मैचिंग? क्योंकि अगर वो मैच कर रहे हैं देन आई कैन बी श्योर कि कंप्यूटर बाकी जगहों पे भी प्रेडिक्ट अच्छा कर रहा होगा. सो दिस इज जेल रोड लाहौर. जेल रोड लाहौर पे हमारा एक बहुत जबरदस्त ईपीए का एक वेदर स्टेशन है, वहां पर रेडार लगा हुआ है, मेट ऑफिस इज देयर. तो वहां पर ये एयर पोल्यूशन की मेजरमेंट्स की जाती है. देयर इज अ कैलिब्रेटेड लेबोरेटरी, और हम उन दोनों के कंपैरिजंस यहाँ पर देख रहे हैं. ठीक है, सो देयर आर सर्टेन ऑब्जर्वेशंस हियर, आई विल नॉट गो इनटू दैट. पता ये चला कि हम कुछ जगहों पे अंडर एस्टिमेट कर रहे हैं, कुछ जगहों पे हम ओवर एस्टिमेट कर रहे हैं. दैट गिव्स अस अ रीजनेबल sort of confidence कि जो हम कर रहे हैं वो ठीक कर रहे हैं कि नहीं कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, so this was one thing. अब just keep in mind हम कंप्यूटर मॉडलिंग कर रहे थे और उसको ऑब्जर्वेशंस के साथ कंपेयर कर रहे थे. But then we said we were not so happy with what was going on. ठीक है, तो कि ये जो कंप्यूटर मॉडलिंग के रिजल्ट्स थे वो इतने हमें बहुत ज्यादा कॉन्फिडेंस नहीं दे रहे. Then the next thing that we did was that we said, okay, at the site where we want to study the impact, let's actually develop an instrument. ठीक है, इंस्ट्रूमेंट क्या होगा? अब यहाँ पर ये देयर इज अ लिटिल कार्टून, ये आप देख रहे हैं कि ये एक दरख्त है, यानी कि दिस इज सम वेजिटेशन, एक दरख्त जो सबसे ऊंची चीज है, और उसकी रूट्स भी मौजूद है. ठीक है, तो द इंस्ट्रूमेंट दैट वी हैव डेवलप्ड इज बेसिकली लाइक द वेदर स्टेशन दैट मे बी फौजिया टॉक्ड अबाउट लास्ट टाइम, जिसमें एट सर्टेन हाइट्स कुछ सेंसर्स लगे हुए हैं. ठीक है, सो एट द हाईएस्ट पॉइंट हियर 10 मीटर्स व्हिच इज अबव द कैनोपी, जो सबसे बड़े से बड़ा दरख्त है उससे ऊपर हम चले गए हैं, और वहां पर हमने ये पर्सनल ओजोन मॉनिटर लगाया हुआ है पॉम के नाम से. ठीक है, और ये ओजोन को मॉनिटर कर रहा है, ये सबसे टॉप पे लगा हुआ है. देयर इज अ रीजन व्हाई दिस इज एट द टॉप. इसी तरह दरमियान में यहाँ पर वो जो आपको जो प्राइमरी आपके पोल्यूटेंट्स थे उनकी कॉन्सेंट्रेशन मेजर करने के लिए कुछ गैस सेंसर्स लगे हुए हैं, टेम्परेचर ह्यूमिडिटी हम निकाल रहे हैं. बट देन व्हाट्स गोइंग ऑन बिलो द सॉइल इज आल्सो वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, बिलीव इट और नॉट. सो वी हैव दीज सॉइल मॉइस्चर सेंसर्स एट वेरियस डेप्थ्स, 10, 40, 100, 200 सेंटीमीटर्स, which is actually telling us कि ये फ्यूम्स जो हैं ऊपर कैसे जा रहे हैं, और खास तौर पे they are being transported by water. तो ये जो लैंड एटमॉस्फेयर इंटरेक्शन है वो हम यहाँ पर इसको देख रहे हैं. तो you can see how complex of an instrument is, and we actually developed the instrument here at LUMS. ठीक है, ये उसकी कुछ further details हैं. If you look inside the box, these were the sort of boxes that we deployed. अच्छा, अब ये this is one of the sites where we deployed the instrument. This is at Bedia. Bedia is not so far from here, like 40-45 minutes from here. So yeah, this is not so far away from the urban center where there is a lot of smog. तो हम ये देखना चाह रहे थे कि there is this site जहाँ पर आप क्रॉप्स उगा रहे हैं, तो वहां पर एयर पोल्यूशन का क्या इम्पैक्ट हो रहा होगा. But this is still not so far away. ठीक है. Then we have another site. This is now in Okada. अब मैं आपको दिखाता हूँ. So ये जिसमें झंडा पाकिस्तान का लगा हुआ है ऊपर. So this is another sort of an instrument. You can see it's a very वो 10 मीटर वाला, मतलब it's a very high instrument. ये यहाँ पर वही ओजोन का सेंसर लगा हुआ है, दरमियान में गैस सेंसर्स हैं. Down below there are all these buried soil moisture sensors for communication है, solar panel लगा हुआ है and all that. And here we are trying to grow something like wheat. उस पे हम impact देखना चाहते हैं. And this is now in Okada. So this is a little bit far away from Lahore, a major urban center, but still it's within Punjab. और यहाँ पर जो हम फसल उगा रहे हैं, and I want to see कि क्या हो रहा होगा. And then we collected data for 2 consecutive winters, a very long campaign जिसमें हमें ये so instruments they sent us data every time automatically, but the instruments had to be maintained. So this is also nature of these studies. आपको field campaign करनी पड़ती है, जाके data collect करना पड़ता है, ठीक है? And as a result of that, we are now getting these profiles. ठीक है? तो वही चीज दोबारा से आ गई ना. You look at the x-axis from 0 to 24 hours जो है, आपके पास मुख्तलिफ concentrations हैं of ozone जो है. So at farm A हमें ये मिल रहा है, farm B हमें ये मिल रहा है. And what are these? These are averaged over a certain time. ठीक है? जैसे month of November के लिए या month of December के लिए या maybe for the entire winter season जो है, तो आपको इस तरह के averages मिल रहे होंगे, या आपको maybe maxima मिल रहे हों कि सबसे maximum concentration जो है वो क्या होगी. So yeah, again, I won't go into the detail of what the concentrations actually were. ठीक है? There are interesting observations about कि क्या हो रहा है. But you can see here कि जैसे जैसे सुबह सूरज तलू होता है, this concentration goes up, और उसके बाद जो है वो वापस आनी शुरू हो जाती है. ठीक है? So I mean that's the general sort of a pattern. And how high these are, और ये कितने ऊपर हैं, खास तौर पे on the y-axis the 40 mark is very interesting, क्योंकि इससे ऊपर जो है this is very extreme, 40 ppb, so this is parts per billion. इससे ऊपर की जो pollution है, this is very high pollution. अच्छा, फिर क्या किया हमने कि then we looked at scientific literature. और scientific literature में there are all these agriculture people who have done fantastic work already, जिसमें उन्होंने models develop किए हुए कि if I get this data out, वो चाहे model से बना हुआ हो, चाहे instrument से बना हुआ हो, we can plug that into these formula and I can get a yield loss. So for wheat, for soybean, for maize or whatever, they have already done this closed chamber sort of experiments. वो एक plant को लेते हैं, उसको expose करते हैं certain concentration of ozone से, और देखते हैं कि yield कितनी जो है वो reduce होती है. So once again, without going into the formula, this is all scientific work which is sort of available. We just borrow it, we plug these numbers into these formula and get a yield loss. ठीक है? और उससे हमें ये yield loss जो नजर आ रहा है. तो once again, I will not comment on कि कितना है, लेकिन ये कि अच्छा खासा, depending on what your perspective is. For wheat, one metric is actually telling us कि up to 10% yield loss जो है वो हो रहा है. So I mean a significant sort of loss is taking place because of air pollution. Achha, so this was the summary of the work. I think I will stop here. Just sort of give you now a revised summary. हमने क्या किया? We use these atmospheric dynamics and chemistry transport models and very advanced computer models. We use this air quality sensor suite instruments which were developed and then deployed, and they had to be maintained. Then we did a lot of data processing, we did comparisons, और आखिर में हमने उन concentrations को एक agricultural research से एक formula लिया और उसके अंदर plug in किया और उससे हमने ये yield losses निकाले. So this is a very typical sort of a environmental sciences kind of a work. I hope आपको इससे कुछ चीजें जो है वो पता चली होंगी. We can go into अच्छा इसका मतलब क्या है और इससे हमें क्या चीजें learn हुई और इसके लिए policy implications क्या हो सकती हैं. Should we be reducing air pollution and all that? But we can take a whole session on that. So Fawzia, I will stop here. I hope मैं थोड़ा सा शायद over time गया हूँ, but maybe I was able to summarize the thing that I wanted to say. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. No, that helps a lot, sir. क्योंकि last time यही बातें मैंने की थी कि कैसे weather surface पे और space से observe होती है और कैसे आप करते हैं और कितना complicated ये process होता है, इतना आसान नहीं होता जितना हमें लगता है, और कैसे models के अपने फायदे और नुकसानात होते हैं जो हम बार-बार कहते रहे lectures में. So I think if you stop sharing your screen, then I would be able to share my screen. Thank you. So in the meantime, does anyone have any question for Dr. Abubakr?
Ma'am, I have a question if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, am I audible?
जी जी
जी सर, वो स्टार्ट में सर आपने बताया कि ये कंप्यूटर मॉडल्स यू यूज्ड टू मेजर द पोल्यूशन एंड द इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स टू मेजर द एयर क्वालिटी। सर इसमें कोई एग्जांपल अगर बता दें हम, क्या आपने अगर आप बता दें हमें कि कौन सी एग्जांपल आप लोगों ने किस तरह ये जो है एयर क्वालिटी मेजर की है, और इसमें आपने इसको कैसे मेजर करके रिजल्ट्स जो हैं वो फाइंड आउट किए हैं। और सर
हाँ
एक और क्वेश्चन मेरा ये था कि
जी जी
एक और क्वेश्चन सर ये था कि जब एयर पोल्यूशन ने, जब आपने यील्ड का लॉस जो है वो आपने काउंट किया है, तो उसमें आपने ये काउंटर इसको किया है कि जो यील्ड की प्रोडक्टिविटी जो चीजें बढ़ाती हैं, तो उससे जो यील्ड बढ़ती है उसके बाद आपने यील्ड का लॉस कैलकुलेट किया है, या
हाँ
उनको जिस तरह और उनसे पहले किया है? तो सर इसमें थोड़ी सी कंफ्यूजन थी कि इसको
ठीक है,
आपने
ग्रेट
कैसे।
ग्रेट ग्रेट। तो पहला जो आपका क्वेश्चन है वो तो ये कि एन एग्जांपल ऑफ अ मॉडल में भी कि जो कि इस तरह का डिस्पर्शन मॉडल होगा। तो अब मुझे नहीं पता आपका मेजर क्या है, बट इफ यू स्टडी मैथमेटिक्स और इफ यू स्टडी
ओके
इंजीनियरिंग, तो देयर आर ऑल दी सॉर्ट ऑफ डिस्पर्शन मॉडल्स दैट यू सी ऑल द टाइम। फॉर एग्जांपल ये जो हीट इक्वेशन अगर आपने कभी देखी हो, पार्शियल डिफरेंशियल इक्वेशंस, दे आर वेरी वेरी
ओके
सिमिलर। आपके पास एक पॉइंट सोर्स है। अब ये पॉइंट सोर्स का वर्ड भी इस्तेमाल किया गया था मेरे ख्याल में, आप जब हाइड्रोस्फीयर को आप देख रहे थे, तो वहां से वो पॉइंट सोर्स जो है वो पोल्यूशन को कैसे फैलाता है। दीज मॉडल्स आर नॉट सो डिफिकल्ट, सॉरी सो डिफरेंट फ्रॉम दैट। सिर्फ होता ये है कि टू रन दीज मॉडल्स ऑन अ वेरी लार्ज एरिया एंड सॉर्ट ऑफ इनकॉर्पोरेटिंग ऑल ऑफ दीज इंटरैक्शंस, उसके लिए आपको ये सुपर कंप्यूटर्स एंड ऑल जो इस्तेमाल करने पड़ते हैं। ठीक है, सो पहली चीज तो ये थी, एंड दिस इज अ वेरी बिग फील्ड न्यूमेरिकल मॉडलिंग की। और ये जो मैंने आपको डिस्क्राइब किया था ये तो बड़ा सिंपल सा एक मॉडल है, लेकिन बहुत सोफिस्टिकेटेड मॉडल्स भी होते हैं। लेकिन सिंपल से मॉडल को भी बहुत बड़ी एक ज्योग्राफिकल स्पेस पे चलाना, इट्स क्वाइट अ बिट ऑफ एन आर्ट। और ये वक्त गुजरने के साथ साथ कंप्यूटिंग ज्यादा हमारे पास आ रही है, हमारे पास ज्यादा तरीके डिस्कवर हो रहे हैं, तो ये चीजें आसान भी होती जा रही हैं। दैट वाज वन थिंग। जो आपका दूसरा सवाल था वो बहुत जबरदस्त है, क्योंकि यू एक्चुअली आस्क्ड मी कि आपने तो ये सारा कुछ मेजर कर लिया और
यस
आपने कह दिया कि ये ओजोन की कॉन्सेंट्रेशन है, यू प्लग इट इनटू अ फार्मूला, बट हाउ डू यू नो कि वो जो आपका जो फसल थी, मे बी उसमें कोई वाटर डेफिसिट हो, या उसमें कोई खाद आपने वक्त पे नहीं दी थी, या मे बी कोई और फैक्टर्स है जिसकी वजह से यील्ड लॉस था, या यील्ड बढ़ गई हो। ये भी तो
जी
पॉसिबल
जी
है ना
जी, बिल्कुल
कि
बिल्कुल।
ओजोन की वजह से कम हो रही हो लेकिन खाद अच्छी मिली है तो यील्ड बढ़ गई हो।
तो
तो
यील्ड बढ़
एक्चुअली
गई है।
हाँ, तो एक्चुअली ये साइंस में यू डू दीज कंट्रोल्ड एक्सपेरिमेंट्स, यही हमने भी किए कि यू एक्चुअली कंपेयर अगेंस्ट अ कंट्रोल, कि एक जगह पे इंटरवेंशन हो रही है और एक जगह पे जो है वो इंटरवेंशन जो है वो नहीं हो रही। सो वंस अगेन आई डोंट हैव द टाइम टू एक्सप्लेन एवरीथिंग, बट वी वर वेरी केयरफुल विद दिस। जब हमने ये किया सारा तो उसमें हम वी वर वेरी केयरफुल कि वी वर लुकिंग एट कि उसको एक पानी वक्त पे मिल रहा है, उसको उसको खाद जो है वो मुनासिब डाली जा रही है, ताकि जो स्ट्रेसेस हैं वो सिर्फ ओजोन की वजह से हो, वो और किसी चीज की वजह से ना हो। well, that's an excellent question.
थैंक यू सर।
Okay. Thank you, Sad, and thank you, Hassan, for the question. I think we can jump to our lecture for today. Today, we have a couple of things. There is a quiz that I think I have. Okay, I will publish it later, but there will be a quiz on the LMS, which is more, it's not a traditional, choose multiple choice questions. I would kind of give you the room to think. Especially, for example, when you see it, you will know that they're very generic questions, but I would like to see some science from the people with non-science background, because I've tried to explain it again and again to you, that how the science can explain a simple life choice question like, why do you eat vegetables and not meat? So there are similar sort of questions, but you can go back to the slides, look at the slides and answer the question. And then, we will see how you do, and then it will help me analyze what needs to be done in future and how I should teach certain things in future. So today I wanted to do something different, but I think so far I've terribly failed at it. So I will just present some slides, and then we're going to go back to the dear old blackboard and look at some of the cycles. And I will look at a lot of input from you, because I think in the last slide, when I was explaining the sources of pollutants, I told you what the sources were. So if I'm missing something, if you think there was something from the previous slides, that few things I haven't put there on purpose, then feel free to add on to that. But we studied the biosphere, we studied the hydrosphere, we studied the atmosphere. What remains now is the geosphere or the lithosphere. And the geosphere basically is all of Earth. It is Earth from the core to the mantle to the crust, all of it is geosphere. But if you only look at that part, which is the upper mantle and the crust, that refers to the lithosphere, which is kind of where I would say life exists, or kind of where those interactions between different spheres existed that we had mentioned previously. Right? We said that all spheres interact amongst themselves. And I think Dr. Abubakr mentioned it at some point as well, that there was an atmosphere-land interaction that they looked at, or the troposphere-land interaction that they looked at. I could also call it the lithosphere-troposphere interaction that this particular study was looking at. But there can be a biosphere-atmosphere interaction. There can be a lithosphere-biosphere-atmosphere interaction. And before I move to the next slide, I will let Rafi ask a question because he hasn't asked anything in a long time.
Hello, Assalamualaikum. Sorry, ma'am, I was sick in the last 2 classes. But besides that, I was just kind of always concerned as to how we found out about the inner core and the outer core. Like, how did we even like?
Yeah, now you're testing my skills, huh? Okay, so basically a lot of times, like Sir said, some of the things are predicted. In the previous slide, did you see that somewhere I had mentioned that lithosphere only accounts for 0.04%? Now, of course, I'm not an expert in that field, but what I can tell you is that if all of this weight that we're looking at, all of this water weight that we're looking at, if all of this accounts for the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the lithosphere, in the previous presentation, we said it accounts for roughly 0.05%. If that is the weight, then where does all of the weight lie? And then you kind of go back to how life started, how Earth started, how life on Earth started, or how it cooled down and became what it has become today. And in that study, they kind of found out what the parent materials were, right? So if we have nitrogen today, phosphorus, sulfur, all of these things that we talk about, if there are a lot of metals, and not just the elements, but let's speak about the metals, if they exist, if we speak about the lava. And so I think it would mostly fit into the field of, if I could go closely to what we are studying today, the field of environmental geology, where I studied some of this and where we said how they could have guessed all of this. Now, of course, they can't go up after a certain depth because the temperature rises so much. And no, I don't think many equipments can work there. But we have gone to extreme temperatures, right? The satellites live at such extreme temperatures. So I think the guess purely was on the basis of weight and on the basis of parent material, where all of these things come from. Where did the carbon dioxide come from? If the primitive Earth did not have oxygen, where did the oxygen come from? So all of those questions were solved on the basis of hypotheses, and those hypotheses were kind of proved right over and over again. And so I can say that this is the best explanation. Most of it is backed by research, but some of it is guessing, purely guessing as well. And that actually goes back to what we have on the Earth and trying to go back to the parent material. And I think they say that because the inner core has most of the weight, they just think that it's mostly metals, the metals that are found on the surface of Earth. And as far as, for example, the lava and all of that's concerned, we see that, right? That we see. We know how the tectonic plates kind of float on it. We know, I'm sure some of you know how Earth was formed. So, or how land is formed on this planet. So if it was really a bubble of lava, then how did the water and the Earth end up being there? So the tectonic plates, like that's another field that I think we can have another 3-4 lectures on. But to tell you simply, these tectonic plates have given us the land. So maybe it's part of the lecture indirectly, that when tectonic plates move towards each other, after the collision, mountains are formed, at least as far as whatever I remember from my undergrad. And so that's one form of land, right? When the mountains are formed, the rocks or the mountains can weather, and they cool down, of course, and they take the shape that they take, but then they weather and soil is formed. So that goes into our lithosphere. But when the plates move away from each other, what happens then? So you might have seen in a lot of places that lava is still coming out. What happens to that lava? When it comes out, it kind of cools down and becomes the new layer of soil that we see. So when the tectonic plates would move away from each other, new soil or new land, new piece of land is formed. So that, like, environmental geology or geology in general, I think, is another fascinating field, which is also evolving with science. It's also evolving with research. So I'm sure what I've shared just shared with you is very limited knowledge. But if you're interested, you can go back and read this. But like
Actually,
I said, yeah.
It's actually really cool. I get it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I loved it as well. I mean, when you think about all of these materials, especially when we talk about the minerals in the rocks, where does that come from? It actually comes from the earth, right? The core of the earth, or let's say the mantle of the earth. And that's how we kind of guess, and we guess it on the basis of weight as well. But all of it is depends on how the earth has evolved and what kind of elements are available, and the scientific research that is available, all on the surface as well as from the space. All right, so a lot of isotopes, for example, are monitored from the satellites, and those isotopes tell you how temperature and everything else is changing on the planet, or how a certain concentration of something is changing on the planet. And then they can tell you a lot about the lithosphere. Okay, so the previous one was my own drawing, and that's why it was bad, but I thought just to treat your eyes, I should add a more professional diagram in there, which basically shows the same thing that I presented in the previous slide.
Dr. Fauziya, sorry to interrupt you. Some of the students have a tutorial from 7 to 8, and they're asking basically when the quiz will be and how long will it be.
I know they are always just bothered about marks and testing and hardly ever about my lecture. So I've given you a window. I don't know why you said yes to a tutorial that's starting at 7. I think you should tell your tutor that you can only join at 7:15. As far as the quiz is concerned, I've given them time until 8 p.m. to submit it. So I think we're all right. But if they drop their names, I will look at the chat box and I can give you the liberty to submit a little later as well. Are we done with the marking? Okay, so we spoke about the earth, the soil, formation of the soil. It's all another science, another area that we can speak a lot about. So, but what matters to us, to life, is a few elements. We're not bothered about every element on the periodic table. We're only bothered about the elements that somehow change these spheres or the balance of these spheres. So again, like, we're not doing hardcore mathematical or material balancing things, but if we did, we would look at how these materials are balanced in each sphere. But we'll not look at them. We'll just look at the 40 elements that are required for life of plants or animals on this planet. And even out of those, we say that there's 17 very crucial elements. And even out of those 17, we're generally most bothered about, carbon, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, some of these essential elements. But they're all kinds of cycles. I sometimes call them biogeochemical cycles because they're between the bio and the geosphere. Sometimes call them nutrient cycles because they're important for our survival and they're important nutrients. They can be gaseous, which means it involves the atmosphere. They can be sedimentary, which means it just remains in the sediments under deep ocean or on Earth. Or they can be a part of the hydrosphere. But I think hydrosphere so far dominates this, the different circles. And today, I don't know why we'll not be looking at hydrosphere, because we will have a chance to look at, we already discussed it and we'll look at it again when we discuss environmental pollution, especially industrial environmental pollution. So I'll leave it here and only tell you that the interaction can be between, like I said, different spheres. So for example, phosphorus is a sedimentary cycle. It just happens on the sediment on the surface. It doesn't have much to do with the atmosphere. So that's what I wanted you to get in this. And now I actually I had a question here. So I said we need nutrients, the macronutrients that we need, the micronutrients that we need. We can just say that zinc is a micronutrient, which I need for certain actions in my body, and oxygen is a macronutrient because without it, I cannot survive. But how do you find it? If let's say proteins are the building blocks of all the meat or all the overall mass on my body, then is there a control? Like, is there a very fit person here who knows what are the sources of these minerals in your natural food or from your natural diet? How do you fulfill these? So generally, like in our circle, there are girls who say we don't want to eat a lot of carbs. And then those who go to the gym often eat a lot of protein. Rafe is someone who is not Rafe. Come on.
Ma'am, can you please repeat your question? The internet got a bit weird.
Okay, so the question is that I said that there are macronutrients that we need for the body and the micronutrients that we need for the body. You can call them, for example, protein is a macronutrient because you really need it for your body or for a healthy life. And then macronutrient could be a vitamin. You know, if you get it, you would be healthy, but if you get it in little amounts, it wouldn't kill you, but you would need it in very, very small quantities anyway. So do you know about a source? Are you someone who cares about what they're eating? Because I think that's also important. Something that I would like you to take away from this course also is be careful about what you're eating. Someone has raised their hand. Taha.
Yes, ma'am. Amongst macronutrients, what I know is so about carbs, and what they usually say that if you want to lose weight, you need to stay away from carbs. And carbs consist mostly of bread, rice, and they give you, in a more like scientific way, it basically provides immediate energy to the body. Whereas protein, you usually get that from meat, but also a lot of vegetable substitutes such as pulses and there's whey, casein, milk produces, which basically allow you to have certain substitutes for protein, which help build muscle. And then there's fat. So fat also, people used to think that fat made you gain fat, but now it's actually been established that such is not the case. And those are also usually animal fats or vegetable produced oils. So those are mostly macronutrients. And in micronutrients, these, from what I know, especially vitamins, they help in a little more niche categories of your body. So some vitamins help your autoimmune system, some help in bone structures and certain these aspects. Their sources are usually from fruits, as those are one of the more well-known sources of vitamins. And from minerals, it's also mineral water is one of those better areas to get those sources.
Well done. That was a very good explanation. You did much better than what I could have done. Anyways, so we said that soil is formed. We said that in the lithosphere, the upper crust is important. It is important because that's where life exists. In the graphs, in the previous pictures about relating to ozone, we also saw how the roots go up until a certain zone, and you know why the sphere would be important. Partly because I said that there are certain sediments there which carry a lot of minerals which we need, or elements or metals which we need for our everyday application. And also, like we discussed a little bit about soil formation, but here I kind of don't want you to go, this is a very complicated field again, but I want you to know that soil has a certain layers. And this is a very nice image which gives you an understanding of how soil matures over time. So for example, I can tell you that the soil that's in the north is not as mature as the soil that is in Punjab, because it's not, you know, it's less fertile. It might have a lot of minerals, but the weather is hard. The right kind of microorganisms are not allowed to grow. As soon as you start digging, you'd get these big gravels in the soil. So it's not, you know, it's a tough activity. And I think that's because it's a young soil. At least that's what I've seen, and that's what I can just infer. And from my knowledge, I know that's because if rocks are weathering, or if the mountains are weathering and soil is being formed, then perhaps most of the nice soil has transported with water and other functions and has come downstream, and the soil there is still young, right? So that's just an observation. You can go back to the slide and look at it, and I've added a few slides in the annex slide which tell you literally about every complicated zone. Maybe people in chemistry and biology need to definitely know it. But you know, I would not go into O, A, E and all those layers, but just for you to know that there's a surface soil, there's a topsoil, there's a subsoil, and then the parent material that we say which the soil comes from because of weathering or because of activities of microorganisms. And it essentially holds that cycle in the lithosphere that we were talking about, sedimentary as well as gaseous. So whether it's capturing carbon from the atmosphere, whether it's fixing the nitrogen in the roots of the plants as leguminous plants, so that those plants take the nitrogen that they need to build their basic building blocks. And that function is done by a bacteria. So you can see that how a biosphere in combination with another life on the biosphere is actually taking something from the atmosphere and then fixing it for the symbiotic relationship where the plant then grows and becomes food for a consumer. Right? So I think you can go back to this and look at it. I thought if we are studying the lithosphere, we should definitely know about this. Again, this is something that you should just know, but if you're interested, you should get into the detail of this, because like we said, when Dr. Abubakr talked about that ozone and the stresses that could have been a part of it, he said that we try to control all the stresses as well as the natural characteristics. They must have taken all of those into account, right? Because what happens is if you have a clay soil, then the water holding capacity of that soil is much more than a sand. And we know that. If you put water in the sand, it would just go down. And then if you put it on a clay, it would be able to hold more water. And it has to do a lot because of the smaller size, the surface area would increase and all of those things. But partly also because of the diameters, but as well as the chemical characteristics. So the clay has a pH, or it's more basic. Soil in general is more basic. But what happens is that when you put water on the soil, then it holds the water, and it's good if it holds the water, right? Because how would that impact? So I was very tempted to teach you a little bit of agriculture here, but I stopped myself because we're discussing it in future as well. So soil has, again, a direct combination with food production. And right now, the biggest problem perhaps facing the world is food and hunger and malnutrition, and the unequal distribution of resources in the name of food. And that's because the ecosystems vary so much, or that's because wealth varies so much as well. And that wealth can be natural capital, which is water, or general money, which is a capital that we have created. Anyways, so these soils, for you to know that soil has different types, and each type would allow a certain kind of activity on it. And there are reasons for that. So all the characteristics are basically because of what kind of soil you have. But there's no distinct category of the soil. These soils can be found in combination because, again, they're formed by the weathering of the rock. So of course, when they are weathered, they become sand, and then they can weather or they get into combinations and have different amount of humus or litter from the plant. So on the surface of soil, there's a lot of litter, which is organic matter that comes from plants and animals. And that organic matter makes, if it remains for a longer amount of time, it would make humus. And if you've seen very dark soils, it's because of the organic content or the rich organic content of the soil. So I just wanted you to know that a soil can be a mixture of any of those things, and that would change its characteristics, and that would change how Earth behaves, or how the surface of Earth behaves when we grow crops. All right, and why is that important? Of course, we will again look at how intensive agriculture has impacted the Earth. But I think before that, we can also look at other things. Acidification, because we studied it last time. So who can explain to me what acidification of the soil might mean? And someone who hasn't spoken already in this class. Hassan.
Okay, so last time I remember us studying about acid rain and how pollutants basically get absorbed into the rainwater, and due to things like surface runoff, or like due to like rivers passing by or streams passing by, can be absorbed into the soil. That can also lead to eutrophication, but like that's more for the rivers. And that would basically increase the pH, because you have like the NOx, and you have like hydrochloric acid and things like sulfuric acid. that can come down from rain, and that would increase the decrease the pH to acid.
Yeah. So that is correct. And then a lot of natural activities on the surface of Earth can also cause acidification, and it's bad for the plant. It's the same things that we saw in the case of ozone, that it impacts the stomata, it impacts the chlorophyll, and that's why you would see the yellowing or chlorosis of the plant, and it's not able to grow very well. So it impacts that. And the major source of this very often has been the industrialization and the acid rains that are affiliated with it. So just like they could dissolve lime into themselves, they can also dissolve they can also impact the chlorophyll in the plant. And then there are a lot of other problems, which is, for example, this is an image of a forest, and we're showing how there's desertification happening. It can happen for a lot of reasons. It can happen naturally because of changing resources, but it can also happen because of anthropogenic activities where we just cut it. A lot of times deforestation has happened because the population of the earth is increasing and we want more land to grow crops. And that is a huge problem. And you would see people often saying that, for example, a project on growing more corns because they wanted to produce ethanol or biogas, and a lot of deforestation happened for that. So sometimes when you make decisions such as growing a certain kind of crop and not allowing the natural crop to grow there, then what happens is over time, because the land is not used to that, the microorganisms in the land are not used to that, they have a certain adaptation. So if the land is not clever enough, or if the land is not, the combinations of all of those things, if it's not mature, if it's not rich with life, then it would be difficult for the microorganisms to fix all those or degrade the sediments and make it available for the plant. And that's why sometimes desertification happens. And this slide is more of for you to see the human impact on the soil and how that would impact in the end food production as well. And the surface soil is very important because, like I said, the litter or life that it dies goes there, and it provides all the nutrients right at the surface of Earth. And next is salinization or salinity, if you've heard about it. I have a question later, so I'll just leave it for there. As you know, the salinity of the name indicates that the salinity would increase in case of salinization. And again, it can happen because we are putting in a lot of chemicals or naturally as well. But we will see that in the coming slides. And I don't know why I've written salination, but the one that's at the bottom is dust storm. And this is becoming an emerging problem alongside droughts. It's becoming an emerging problem in terms of the soil quality, because there are dust storms that just take that soil that is formed over time and they kind of take it away from its points of origin, just like land erosion, which happens also again because of deforestation and other problems. So who here has heard of scarp? Because you're in Punjab, you should know. Most of you are from Punjab, so I think you should know what scarp is, maybe an idea of it. If not, I can just tell you what it is. So if someone knows it, please raise your hands. Okay, so with salinity, Eamon, go ahead, Eamon.
Ma'am, so I don't know much details, but what I do know is the fact that it's a project which tries to reclaim land that has been lost due to human activities. For example, I heard about a project that was taking place in the south, in the mangrove forests, and in Balochistan, where some of the land had turned into desert due to human activities. So yeah.
I mean, I can take that answer. So you know something. So basically, before salinity, there is a problem of waterlogging, which is that we studied the water table in the hydrosphere, right? We said that at a certain level in the ground, there is a water level past which there is a saturated zone from which you can extract groundwater and bring it to the surface and use it. And we also said that because it's naturally filtered, it's very pristine. Now, what happens with waterlogging is that if the groundwater table rises, and it rises so much, let's say you are a you're someone like my father who loves to water things all the time, and you just have a small container to grow a crop. If you keep adding water to it, would that increase the productivity of the crop? Would that increase the growth? No, because if it's in a natural environment, it would leach the chemicals away. I think that's why projects like soil moisture sensor or the others that we keep mentioning, or efficient irrigation, are important. Because if you water it too much, then of course you can waste water, but also you can take a lot of the nutrients which are close to or around that top soil that we saw, or subsoil that we saw, where the roots grow and there's a root zone. If you just keep watering it, you will take those nutrients away, either laterally or otherwise. And then, those nutrients will not be available for the plant. But to ignore that for a moment and just thinking of keep watering a land until the groundwater is up to here. And a land always has water. And the problem with that is that when that happens, and there is more evaporation and more chemicals are being put in, especially in the form of fertilizers, then what happens is that now you don't have that natural phenomena of water going away and taking some of the salts away with it. Because the other layers of the soil can take that a little bit. And then we know that groundwater at some point is brackish as well. So even when we speak about aquifers in the hydrospheres, if you go too down or if you go too deep, then there would be a time where the water will not be sweet anymore. So a lot of these salts naturally go away and are lying at the bottom of your aquifers most of the times. But if the water is coming up, then the soil is logged and those nutrients are not going away. If there's increased evaporation, then those salts remain at the surface. And that problem is called the water intensity, or the water problem is called water logging, but the salts that it leaves behind is called salinity. And SCARP was basically a project of installing tube wells in areas where the groundwater table had reached a very high level, so that groundwater could be extracted, made a part of the canals, sent for drinking, and all the many functions that it can do when you bring it to the surface. That was done, and it was done with a lot of aid money. And the aid money is often, it's a loan. It's a loan that we get from these big banks or these big donor agencies. And once you take it and you haven't thought about the sustainability of it, and if you continue to do it, then it also becomes a problem. So SCARP has its own problem, but just to establish here that this project was brought in to solve the issues of waterlogging in Punjab. And what you see is the fourth drainage, so like the fourth phase of the project. And I'm sure there are many phases and you can read about them, but there is a more economic aspect of it that I've added to it as well. But just for you to know that just like the biosphere, just like the atmosphere, just like the hydrosphere, we also at times, and logging can happen naturally as well, but mostly it's increased, or the problems associated with it are increased when we come into picture. So let's go back. How much time do we have?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just had a question from the previous slide.
Mm-hmm.
The percentages didn't add up to 100. Was there some other category which was missing?
Which percentages?
The percentage is showing over here. There's salt free and salt affected. Is there a third category?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't look at it in so much detail, but I think it probably depends on how much they analyzed as well. So 60-40. So maybe there were some unanalyzed or some. Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't look at it in that much detail, but I just wanted you to know that with this project, the salt concentrations or the salt affected areas had recovered. That was the intention here. It wasn't to, and then the project that I picked it wasn't a bad paper. It was a Cornell paper, but anyway, I can see that there is a mistake, but I will go back to it and see it as well. And if you're interested, you can go back to the reading that I've shown at the bottom and then tell everybody else too. So this brings us back to our lecture, which is looking at the cycles. And we'll quickly look at it, but what I want you to do is just like quickly look at it, but also go home and do an assignment, which is, if I can show that to you now. It's to draw all of these tables onto one platform. So let's just say one Earth and all these cycles, which is sulfur, hydro cycle, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. These 4 cycles. Right now, we'll quickly look at them and test your knowledge from the previous lecture. But this is your first assignment, and I'll put it on the LMS and you can submit it. And as soon as this lecture is over, because I think we have very little time, so in the 5 minutes, we'll quickly look at those cycles. And then I can probably ask you to head to the quiz and see what you, when I've given you some room for submission, because they're more questions for you to think about, and they're general questions, more cognitive, but I want you to put the science that you learned from different lectures into the answers as well. So quickly, if I stop sharing the screen here and go here. So, all right. So what you see right now is the carbon cycle. And we studied in the last slide. So I'll go a little far and see if you can still hear me. What we studied in the last slide were sources of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and methane. So if you remember them, maybe one of you can repeat what those sources were. And of course, you can look at the okay. Anybody? Nadia.
Ma'am, the main source of carbon dioxide is from the fossil fuels and the forest fires, and also is a byproduct of the respiration. Also, the carbon monoxide is a product of incomplete combustion of of carbon-containing compounds, and then the methane is from the landfills and the manure of the animals.
Right. So can you see the screen at all? Can you see the screen that I... Can you see the screen? Okay. Yeah, I understand it now. All right. Okay. So we said that there are various natural sources, artificial sources of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, as well as methane, which mostly is the fossil fuels. Now, does anyone not know what fossil fuels are? Because if I've mentioned it several times, and if you do not know it, then that's a problem, I think, because I need to explain it to you now. Does anyone, and there's no problem if you don't know it. No? Okay, now I am asking you what is the difference between coal, oil, and natural gas? Because you know what fossil fuels are. Fateh, do you want to say something?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so coal, oil, and natural gas. Now, coal oil is basically oil made during the conversion of coal into oil, usually used in kerosene lamps and the like. And natural gas is gas extracted from underground, where where oil reserves also exist.
Okay, so I can quickly say this.
Essentially, one is manufactured and man-made manufactured, and the other is naturally occurring.
Okay, but all of them, all of the fossil fuels are, which is coal, oil, and natural gas, are natural. And there are 3 different types of fossil fuels. So can you hear me clearly? Because I'm a little far from the...
Yes, miss.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
If you can hear me, then basically coal, oil, and natural gas is this. It's carbon. It's what we produce from the carbon cycles. And what happens is all of these dead plants, dead animals, the peat, the humus that we were talking about, under high temperature and pressure, after many, so we said this happened over so many hundreds of thousands of years, right? And that's why we say it's non-renewable resource. So basically what happened is that after a certain amount of time, under high temperature, pressure, anoxic conditions, which means no oxygen, this litter from life was able to convert into fossil fuels, which is coal, oil, and natural gas, which I've mentioned several times, and I should have explained it to you before because I thought you already know it. So these three fossil fuels naturally exist in our Earth. So they're natural reserves, but they're natural non-renewable reserves. Okay? So what happens is that coal is coal, oil is oil, which is petroleum, and natural gas is natural gas, which is methane, by the way, which we studied. So methane is burnt, and then its carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Oil is burnt, carbon dioxide is released. So carbon dioxide is their product, and that's why it's very important in the carbon cycle. So when I say fossil fuels are burnt, I'm not just referring to one fuel, but all kinds of fuels that are being used for certain actions in the body. And it could be just the simple petrol or the oil in our car, or it could be the liquid gas that we produce from the same natural gas that we use at the house. So all of them are responsible for emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then we said there were a few other sources of carbon into the atmosphere as well. So these things, using the same fuels, by the way, the same fossil fuels, in the transport, in deforestation. And why do we say that deforestation increases the concentration of carbon dioxide? Because they are sinks for carbon dioxide. They, in the process of photosynthesis, take carbon dioxide. And also, they release carbon dioxide as well in cellular respiration. So they are both producers, or they take the carbon dioxide in, and they also exhale carbon dioxide. So they're both ways. So when they respire, they release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and when they perform photosynthesis, then they take the carbon dioxide. All right? And then, what about ocean? I also said in the hydrosphere that oceans have a role to play with carbon dioxide. What role do oceans have? We don't have time. Okay. Oceans are also another sink for carbon dioxide. Because remember, I told you that ocean also has a lot of life here. And that life, especially in the form of reefs and the forests, I'm sure I must have mentioned the forests under the ocean, which are in the form of reefs, or the phytoplanktons, which are plant-like unicellular organisms that are present, which are food for higher forms that we mentioned in the food chain. They all have the ability to perform photosynthesis, and because they have that ability, they have the ability to take oxygen. And in general, water or the ocean can hold or dissolve the carbon dioxide in itself, and that's why oceans generally can be a sink of carbon dioxide as well. So a simple diffusion would allow carbon dioxide to come in, but also to be released. What else? And then similarly, a lot of that dead organic matter in the oceans, when it goes down as the sediments in the oceans, then what happens is the same processes occur there, which is high temperature, high pressure, longer amount of times, anoxic conditions, and fossil fuel production. Now that is because there were certain reserves that we're using, and those reserves we're compromising on. And like I said in the previous lecture, fossil fuels are not entirely just hydrocarbons. They also have sulfur and other pollutants in them. So that is that. And then forest fires are both natural and artificial. And so they are a natural source of carbon dioxide and an artificial source of carbon dioxide. And similarly, the burning in factories and microorganisms have an important role. So sometimes by decomposition, they can release carbon dioxide. Sometimes they can fix carbon dioxide into the natural sphere. So they also have a lot to do in there as well. And I will just quickly go here. Okay, so I don't think I'll go into the detail of this one either, but just so you know, this is the phosphorus sediment cycle. So phosphorus is artificially being added into our land by, we said, fertilizers, we said minerals, natural minerals that are present. That would be a natural source, but let's say if we are using sewers, or the sewerage has a lot of phosphorus. And what else? Yeah, and then the rock erosion, which is like the natural source. And then similarly, the sediments that die, those sediments can store a lot of phosphorus in the deep oceans. So that's where a lot of phosphorus also lies. And then ocean can have it, but ocean doesn't directly have it. It usually is by these rocks that are present on the surface of Earth. And then don't forget the same producers cycle. So all life form, that is plants, will have it. And then the plants, animals who are eating it will have it, and then so on. So that food web is permanent in all cycles, the carbon cycle as well as phosphorus, sulfur, etc., etc. And then, so what were the other sources? Again, you learned about sulfur presence and the sources of sulfur in the environment, both natural and artificial. So maybe you can say it again. Raise your hands quickly. Come on. We studied in the previous slides. You don't remember the acid rain and sulfuric acid? Mostly from the burning of fossil fuels, which is like kind of a constant in all of this, and use of the same. But it is released naturally into the environment as well. So some microbes have the ability to release sulfur into the atmosphere. And because this, I think the person who's working here needs to close this down, so I've requested for another 2 minutes for him. Unfortunately, I won't be able to teach you this in great detail, but maybe I can explain it before the next lecture, because you're going to present it in the atmosphere. But nitrogen is present in the highest amount in the atmosphere, but it is not available, or it's not bioavailable. We cannot take that directly. So it has to be converted in a form where we can take it directly. And generally that form is ammonia, where microorganisms fix it for us, and that's called ammonification in plants otherwise. And then, we take our nitrogen need, which is a need of the